I thought talent was supposed to make people uncomfortable at first. That is what every great comic says, right? The room does not always laugh because the joke is safe. Sometimes it laughs because the joke is true. So when my friends told me to stop using my husband as material, I did not hear concern. I heard fear. I planned his birthday roast to prove I had a voice worth hearing. He sat beside the cake, calm, tapping his glass twice like he always did when he had no answer. By the end of my set, I was sure everyone would finally understand my gift. My name is Lana Greer. I am 34, and I write brand copy for people who pay me to make strangers feel something in 6 words or less. Of course, when I tried to use that same gift in real life, everyone suddenly became delicate. That is how comedy works, whether people admit it or not. The room does not always laugh because a joke is safe. Sometimes the room laughs because someone finally says what is true. I planned my husband's birthday roast to prove my voice belonged under a light, and Ethan sat beside the cake, calm, tapping his glass twice like he always did when he had no answer. I did not start with him. That matters. Ethan and I used to be good. Not exciting in the way people online sell excitement, but good in a quiet way. On Sunday mornings, he made pancakes while I sat on the counter and read him campaign lines from my laptop. He would flip one pancake too early, ruin it, and still put it on his own plate so mine looked perfect. Then he would tell me which slogan sounded cheap, which one sounded clean, and which one sounded like I was trying too hard. He listened. For years, I loved that about him. Then, of course, listening started to feel too much like watching. Ethan was calm about everything: bills, plans, my moods, his own disappointments. If I pushed, he softened. If I snapped, he waited. If I wanted a fight, he gave me a glass of water and asked if I had eaten. Some women might call that love. I started calling it absence. Comedy was the first place where absence disappeared. We went to clubs downtown, small places with sticky tables and low ceilings. The first one smelled like beer, lime, and old carpet. A comic stood under a weak yellow light with a wireless microphone and made a groom in the front row cover his face from laughing. The jokes were sharp, mean even. His job, his mother, his dancing, his soft stomach under a tight shirt. But the groom laughed, the bride laughed, the whole room laughed. I sat beside Ethan with my drink sweating in my hand and thought, I could do that. After the show, Ethan asked if I liked the comic, or if I liked what the microphone did to the room. Soft curiosity. That was his style. Never direct enough to be useful. Never brave enough to be called an argument. I told him I liked talent when I saw it. He tapped the side of his glass twice and said the comic knew where the line was. I told him lines were for people without timing. He smiled a little, but not enough to support me. That annoyed me. The next week we watched a celebrity roast online. Then another. Then a wedding roast at a reception in Austin, where a hired comic made the groom's college years sound like a crime scene and everyone screamed with laughter. I watched the bride wipe tears from her eyes. I watched the groom hug the comic after. That was when the thought became a plan. Not a huge plan. Not yet. I started writing little lines in my phone, observations, edges, things people did not say because they were scared of sounding rude. Mara's laugh when she wanted attention. Caleb's habit of talking about his failed app like it had been stolen by the universe. Whitney's perfect dinner parties that always felt like a test. Ethan saw one note while we were in bed. He asked if Mara knew I was writing jokes about her engagement ending. I told him real comedy did not ask permission first. He was quiet. Then he tapped his mug twice and said real love probably should. Of course he would say that. Ethan could turn a stage into a safety meeting. He did not understand that I was not trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to build something. A voice, a style, a version of myself that did not sit in the dark and clap for other people. The first time I imagined holding a microphone, it felt clean, like proof, like the room would finally have to look at me. I tested the first real lines at Mara's apartment because Mara had the kind of living room that made people feel like they were already being watched. White couch, thin candles, cheese board arranged like a magazine had sent instructions, city noise pressed against the windows, and everyone held a glass too carefully, like spilling wine would prove something about them. I liked that kind of room. It had tension before I even spoke. That is how comedy works. You do not create pressure from nothing. You find pressure that is already there, then you touch it in the right place. Mara asked if I had brought the funny notes I kept talking about. She said it like she was proud of me, and of course I heard permission. I told the room I had been studying real roasts, not safe little wedding speeches where everyone pretends the groom is handsome and the bride never panics. People laughed at that. Not hard, but enough. Enough for me to feel the old open mic shame loosen in my chest. So I kept going. I made a line about Mara's laugh and how it changed depending on whether a man in finance was present. Mara threw her head back, but her eyes moved to the side before the laugh came out. I made a line about Caleb and his app idea that had failed 2 years earlier. I said he still talked about it like Silicon Valley had personally robbed him in an alley. A few people laughed because Caleb laughed first. That is the trick with a room. If the target laughs, everyone else feels allowed to join. Whitney did not laugh. She lifted her glass and looked at the floor, which I thought was her being protective, because Whitney was always protective of everyone's soft spots. Ethan sat near the window, quiet. He was smiling, but not in the open way he smiled when he actually enjoyed something. I knew that smile. It meant he was preparing to be careful with me later. I hated that more than anger. After we left, he did not start right away. He waited until we were in the car and the city lights were running over the windshield. Then he named one specific thing. He said Caleb had stopped talking after my joke about the app, and that I knew the failure had cost him almost a year of confidence. He said I had not teased a habit. I had pressed on a wound. I told him that was dramatic. I told him people who want to be funny have to risk being misunderstood. He tapped the side of his travel cup twice before answering, like he needed courage for a sentence. Then he repeated 3 of my lines exactly. The one about Mara, the one about Caleb, the one about Whitney's dinner parties feeling like a hostage situation with napkins. He had them word for word. I laughed because it sounded so small to me, a husband collecting sentences like parking tickets. I told him keeping score was not the same as having taste. He said he was not keeping score. He was trying to understand when I had started sounding like I did not like the people who loved me. Of course, that was unfair. I liked them. I liked all of them. I just saw them clearly. That was the difference between me and Ethan. He thought love meant looking away from the embarrassing parts. I thought love could survive being honest about them. A week later, I went to a small open mic bar without him. I told him it was a writing thing, which was close enough to the truth for me to sleep fine. The place was narrow and dark, with black walls and a stage barely big enough for one stool and a microphone stand. A man named Julian Ortega hosted the night. He had silver in his beard, sharp shoes, and the tired confidence of someone who had watched 1,000 people fail under bad lighting. I liked him immediately because he did not soften his face when he listened. After one comic bombed, I made a quiet comment near the bar about how his set had the energy of a hostage reading a ransom note he wrote himself. Julian heard me. He smiled and said I had an eye for weakness. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was kind, because it sounded professional. Ethan would have called it mean. Julian called it material. He asked if I performed. I said not yet, but I was working on a roast style. He said most people were too scared to do that because they wanted to be liked. I told him I had spent too long being polite. He said polite women did not get remembered. That was the first time someone said the thing I had been thinking without making me feel guilty for it. When I got home, Ethan asked how the writing thing went. Soft again. Careful again. I said it went well and that I had met people who understood the craft. He asked what craft meant when the material was our friends. I told him he was doing that thing where he turned my growth into his discomfort. He did not answer fast. He tapped his glass twice, then said he was asking because Mara had texted him to ask if I was angry at her. That irritated me more than it should have. Mara had laughed. The room had laughed. Now she wanted to act wounded in private. I told Ethan people always punish the person brave enough to say the first honest thing. He said maybe honesty without care was just damage with better posture. I went to bed angry and opened my notes app under the blanket. I started a new folder called Birthday Ideas, even though Ethan's birthday was still months away. I did not know the full shape yet, but I knew one thing. Friends could leave. Friends could get sensitive. Friends could make a group chat without me and call it peace. Ethan would stay. He was my husband. He had promised to stand beside me. And if the room was too scared to understand my talent, I would build a room where leaving was not so easy. Caleb and Whitney's backyard was the first place where I understood that a room could be trained. String lights hung over the patio, the grill smoked near the fence, and paper plates bent under burgers nobody wanted to admit were dry. Caleb had invited 12 people, maybe 14, enough for a little heat, but not enough for real pressure. I like that size. A small room forgives less, but it also listens harder. Mara was there in a green dress, smiling before I even said anything, because Mara liked when I became sharp. Whitney moved between the table and the cooler, fixing napkins, checking cups, making sure every person had something in their hands. Ethan stood near his father, Russell, who had come even though he looked tired. Diane sat beside him with a sweater over her shoulders. It should have been a normal dinner. Of course, normal was exactly what I was trying to escape. Julian had told me that small rooms were where a comic learned control, so I brought a little Bluetooth microphone as a joke. I told everyone it was just for fun. That is how comedy works. You lower the guard first. You make the room think it is safe, then you show it what it has been hiding. I started with Caleb, because Caleb always laughed at himself when people watched him. I said his grill had the confidence of a man who still believed his failed app was one investor away from changing the world. He laughed too loudly, and the room followed. I moved to Whitney and said her dinner parties were so organized that even the ice cubes probably had assigned seating. A few people laughed. Whitney smiled with her mouth only. I saw it and ignored it. Timing mattered more than softness. Then I looked at Ethan. He was standing near Russell with one hand around a glass of iced tea. He saw my face change before the others did. I know he did, because he tapped the side of his glass twice. I read it as nerves. His usual little pause before becoming disappointed in me. That almost made me smile. I told the room my husband was the only man I knew who could turn a backyard party into a waiting room. People laughed because the line was clean. I said Ethan checked parking signs like the city was personally trying to trap him. More laughter. I said being married to him meant loving a man who spent most of his life buffering. Caleb bent forward over his plate. Mara covered her mouth. That was the sound I wanted. The room was finally with me. So I pushed. I said Ethan was not quiet because he was deep. He was quiet because if he spoke too fast, he might have to become interesting. The laugh came smaller that time, but I thought that meant they needed a stronger line. I said his family had raised silence like it was a skill, and maybe that was what happened when a sick old man in a recliner became the family model for strength. The backyard changed. Not loudly. That was the problem. The worst rooms do not boo. They pull away 1 inch at a time. Diane looked at Russell. Whitney stopped moving. Caleb set his plate down. Mara's mouth stayed open for half a second before she decided whether to laugh. Ethan did not answer me. He did not defend himself. He did not make a scene. He tapped the glass twice again, set it on the patio table and walked to Russell. He asked his father if he wanted to leave. Quiet. Simple. Not dramatic enough for me to fight. That made it worse. I told the room he was proving my point because a real roast needed a target who could take a joke. Nobody helped me carry that line. Caleb looked at the grill. Whitney took the microphone from my hand and said the burgers were ready, even though everyone already had food. I laughed and told her she was saving them from good material. She did not laugh back. Ethan helped Russell stand. Diane gathered her purse slowly, like every movement had to stay polite or she might say something ugly. I wanted someone to tell me I had been bold. Mara usually would have. Instead, she came closer and said maybe the father line was a little much. A little much. Not wrong. Not cruel. Just a little much. I took that as proof I was close to something real. Later, in the car, Ethan did the thing I hated most. He waited until the road was quiet. No shouting, no heat. No husband with enough fire to make me feel chosen. He said I had used his father's illness as material in front of people who cared about him. I told him he was twisting it because he did not like being the center of the joke. He said the joke had stopped being about him the second Russell's face changed. I told him great comedy always made people uncomfortable before it made them honest. He said he was not my heckler. He was my husband. I looked out the window and told him husbands were supposed to support their wives when they had talent. He did not answer for a long time. His hands stayed on the wheel. Then he tapped one finger twice against the leather and said, support did not mean standing still while I cut pieces off him for applause. Of course, he would make it sound like injury. Ethan always did that when he could not win with courage. By the time we got home, I had already decided what the next version needed. Better structure, cleaner build, a real stage, a room that understood the rules before I started. If friends were going to act wounded at backyard jokes, then I needed a setting where nobody could pretend they had not come for a roast. The weeks after Caleb and Whitney's backyard dinner was strange because nobody announced anything. That was what made it insulting. If people had confronted me, I could have answered. If someone had called me cruel, I could have explained timing, pressure, structure, the way a joke needed a little blood in it to feel alive. That is how comedy works. But they did not give me a clean argument. They just became busy. Caleb stopped sending grill photos to the group chat. Whitney answered my messages with little thumbs-up reactions instead of words. Diane replied to my dinner invitations a day late, then said Russell was tired. Mara still sent voice notes, but they were shorter, and she stopped asking to hear new lines. The room was shrinking, only everyone was too polite to admit they were leaving it. Of course, I told myself that meant I was getting closer to something real. People do not step back from boring women. They step back from women who make them nervous. Whitney finally agreed to meet me at a coffee shop patio near the river, the kind of place where every table wobbled and every woman wore sunglasses like she had somewhere more important to be. She arrived with her hair tied back and her phone face down, which already felt like judgment. I told her I knew the backyard had become tense, but tension was not the same as harm. She said Caleb had not been angry about the app joke because of the app. He had been quiet because I had laughed at the worst year of his life in front of people who knew it almost broke him. I told her I was making social commentary. She said I was testing how much shame people would swallow before they called it friendship. I hated how calm she sounded. Calm people always think calm makes them right. I told her she had become too protective because she lived with Caleb's fear of failing again. She said maybe, but at least she knew what she was protecting. That line stayed with me through the drive home, not because it was true, but because she had delivered it better than half the women I had seen at open mic nights. At home, Ethan was in the living room with the lights low. He had an old video playing on his laptop. It was from years earlier, at a tiny comedy club, where I had laughed so hard I leaned into his shoulder and almost spilled my drink. I was younger in the video. Not better, just easier. Ethan watched it with one hand against his mouth. There was no performance in him then. No clever silence, just a man looking at something he missed. I stood behind the couch and asked if he was studying evidence for his case against my personality. He closed the laptop gently and said he was remembering when comedy made me happy instead of hungry. I told him nostalgia was not an argument. He tapped the side of his glass twice before answering, and I already knew the tone coming. He said the pattern was not one joke anymore. It was Mara, Caleb, Whitney, his father, and then him every time I needed a room to prove I was brave. Naming the pattern. That was new. I did not like it. I told him he was building a drama because he could not handle being married to a woman with a voice. He said the voice was never the problem. He said the target was. I decided to compromise because I am not unreasonable. I told him I would make a list of approved topics. Nothing about illness. Nothing about anyone's dead parents. Nothing about failed businesses unless the person had laughed first. I even made a section for Ethan because he was my husband and should have felt honoured that I trusted him with my best material. His quietness, his careful shirts, his fear of public speaking, his awkward dancing at weddings. The way he once cried during a movie about fathers and sons and pretended it was allergies. When I read the list to him, he looked at me like I had wrapped a knife in tissue paper and called it a gift. He said approved by whom? I told him approved by me, because I was the one doing the set. He did not answer. He just tapped the table twice with 2 fingers and moved his glass farther from my notes, like even the paper had become something he did not want near him. A few days later, I saw him at a coffee shop patio with a woman I did not know well enough to dislike yet. Naomi Brooks. I remembered her from one of his college stories and one awkward holiday party. She produced local events, small theatre nights, private comedy bookings, charity auctions, that kind of thing. She had a folder open on the table and Ethan was leaning forward, speaking in that low, careful way he used when he wanted every word to land clean. I walked over because of course I did. Naomi smiled politely and asked if I was coming from work. I said I was coming from a meeting about performance writing. She looked at my notebook and asked if I knew the difference between a roast and a public record of contempt. For 1 second, the patio noise thinned. Cups, cars, a dog barking near the curb. Ethan did not look embarrassed. He looked tired. Not trapped. Tired. I could have asked why Naomi knew enough to say that. I could have asked what Ethan had told her. Instead, I decided she wanted to feel important beside my husband because he made quiet women feel safe. I laughed and told her event producers always confused rules with taste. Julian understood better. When I told him about the patio, he said Naomi sounded like the kind of woman who made rooms safe and forgettable. He said pain was where the best material lived. That sentence felt like permission again. So I opened my birthday ideas folder and made the first real title page, Ethan Greer, A Loving Roast. Under it, I wrote the line that would open the night, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the room coming back to me. I built Ethan's birthday roast in my home office with index cards, a black marker, and a bag of gold candles sitting beside my laptop, like proof that I was still doing something generous. That was the part people kept missing. I was not planning some attack in the dark. I was planning a birthday night, a tribute, a performance, a room where my husband would be at the center and I would finally show everyone that I knew how to turn marriage into material. That is how comedy works. You take what is close, what is private, what has pressure under it, and you shape it until people can laugh without admitting why it hurt. I rented a private comedy lounge downtown, the same kind of small black room Ethan and I used to love before he started treating every stage like a crime scene. Warm lights, small tables, a bar in the back, one real wireless microphone. Not a Bluetooth toy, a real one. I told the venue manager, Tessa, that it was a surprise birthday roast for my husband, and she asked if he knew it was a roast. I said of course he did, because we were comedy people. That was not completely true, but it sounded like the kind of truth a professional would understand. I invited Caleb and Whitney, even though Caleb had become slow with replies. I invited Mara first, because Mara had been there from the beginning, and because part of me still wanted her laugh near the front. I invited Diane and Russell, because family made a roast feel official. I invited Julian because he said he might bring 2 open mic people if the night had teeth. Teeth. I loved that. It sounded like craft instead of cruelty. Ethan found the cue cards on my desk 3 nights before the party. He did not pick them up. He just stood there with his hand on the back of my chair and read the top card where I had written his name in block letters. Ethan Greer, a loving roast. His eyes moved over the next few lines. His awkward dancing, his safe shirts, his fear of public speaking, the way he cried during that father and son movie and blamed the air conditioner. He asked if those were really the parts of him I wanted strangers and relatives to remember. Calm, clean, final without sounding final. I told him nobody remembered soft speeches. He asked why his private moments had become my strongest material. I told him because private moments were where people were most honest. He tapped the side of my desk twice, not the glass this time, because there was no glass near him. I hated that the sound still worked on me. 2 taps, a pause. A man buying time because he had no fire. He said he would go if I could make the night kind. I laughed because that word sounded so small in my office. Kind. As if any comic had ever become great by being kind. Then he said I could cancel the roast and talk to him without an audience. He said he would listen if I spoke as his wife and not as a performer. That was when I gave him the one truth he never liked hearing. I told him he had made me invisible for years. I told him he called silence patience because it made him feel mature. I told him every time I wanted heat, he gave me calm. Every time I wanted to be fought for, he gave me space. Every time I wanted to feel chosen, he acted like staying in the same room was enough. He did not deny it. That mattered. His face did not change, but he did not deny it. So I kept going. I told him if he wanted softer jokes, he should have been a more interesting husband. He looked at me for a long second, then said he would not stop me. He said he would attend, sit where I wanted, and let me finish what I was building. After that, he would handle things properly. No threat, no raised voice, no big husband scene. He tapped the edge of my desk twice and walked out. I read that as surrender because what else could it be? The next morning I sent Mara the final draft. Not all of it, just the strongest sections. The movie line, the waiting room line. The closer about Ethan being the perfect practice audience because he never had the spine to walk out. I expected voice notes. I expected her to help me sharpen the transitions. 2 hours passed. 3. Then she replied with one sentence, saying maybe I should do less. I stared at the message and set the phone face down. Less was what people always asked from women who scared them. Less voice, less hunger, less truth. Julian answered in 7 minutes. He said the draft had teeth and that the closer would either kill or start a fight. I took that as praise. The day before the party, Ethan moved his old comedy club tickets from the corkboard in our hallway and placed them in a drawer. He did it while I was checking the cake order. A small action. Too quiet to accuse him of anything. I asked if he was cleaning now because he needed to feel in control. He said he was done confusing memories with permission. I told him that sounded like one of Naomi's little event producer lines. He did not correct me. That made me feel taller. By the night of the party, my cards were numbered, my dress was black, and the microphone was waiting for me under warm light. The room would understand once I began. Ethan's silence had already given me the stage. The comedy lounge looked perfect that night. Small black stage, warm lights, a cake near the side table, candle smoke mixing with lime and beer from the bar. The wireless microphone waited on its stand, and I touched it before anyone arrived, just to feel the weight of it. This was not a backyard. This was not Mara's apartment. This was a real room, and the room had rules. That is how comedy works. People came knowing they might bleed a little and laugh anyway. Ethan sat beside the cake in a dark shirt, calm, one hand around a glass he barely touched. Julian stood near the bar, not as close to the stage as I wanted. Mara arrived late and stayed near the back. Of course, I told myself they were nervous for me. I started light. Ethan's careful shirts. Ethan checking parking signs like the city was hiding traps. Ethan turning romance into a waiting room with better pillows. A few people laughed. That was enough. I moved faster. His awkward dancing, his quiet panic before meeting my co-workers. His soft little tears during that movie about fathers and sons. The laugh thinned, so I went for the closer. I told them Ethan had been the perfect practice audience because he never had the spine to walk out. Nobody laughed. Ethan set his glass down. 2 taps. Then he stood. He smiled, and for the first time, the smile did not look empty. It looked chosen. He asked for the microphone. I gave it to him because refusing would make me look afraid. He told the room that I once said a real comic should survive hearing the truth. Then he began. He did not insult my face, he did not mock my body, he did not shout. He told them I had tried this first on Mara's broken engagement, then Caleb's failed app, then Whitney's anxiety, then Russell's illness. He said every time someone stepped back, I called them weak. Every time someone got quiet, I called it tension. Every time he asked me to stop, I called him afraid of my talent. He said the first time he tapped his glass, he was trying not to embarrass me in a comedy club. The second time he was trying to remember my exact words because I kept pretending they were softer later. At Caleb's house, he stopped defending himself because Russell's face mattered more than my applause. When Naomi asked about the lounge, he told her the truth. When I planned his birthday roast, he decided not to protect me from the room I had built. I set my glass on the table, but my hand stayed around the stem. Tessa, the venue manager, said roast comedy needed consent and a person who was still safe in the room. I tried to laugh and say that was exactly what comedy was. No one helped me carry the sentence. Julian told Tessa he would not perform after this and did not want his name attached to the night. He took his jacket and left through the side door. I looked for Mara, but she was already near the exit, phone in hand, not recording and not defending. 2 days later, Ethan sent a civil complaint draft and a takedown demand for the birthday clips I had posted. Ethan stayed in the apartment for 30 days while I moved into a small studio above a nail salon. Our shared account became bills only until the separation agreement was signed. Caleb and Whitney removed me from the summer trip thread. Julian blocked me after telling one open mic host I was not ready for rooms with real people. A boutique client asked me to step away from a campaign about kindness after seeing the clips. I still think some of my lines were sharp. I still think part of me had talent. But I wanted a microphone because silence once humiliated me, and then I used a microphone to make everyone else feel small enough to stay quiet. The wireless microphone was returned to the lounge in a plastic bin with my fake award ribbons. I wanted the room to remember my voice, and now the only thing they remember is when he took it from my hand.